I saw this space. I just wanted to pop in. You're talking about the church is Israel.
Yes.
So can you elaborate on that? Because there's many ways you could take that statement.
In the sense of the traditional Orthodox Catholic Church is the Israel of God of Galatians 6:16.
Oh, okay. So you're basically saying it's like, is that like supersessionism, where the church is like the new Israel? It's like replacing the nation of Israel?
I think fulfillment is a better term than replacement, because it's one faith all the way back to Noah prior to even Abraham. It's that same faith all the way up into Romans 15, where Paul says that all the covenants, whether the Mosaic or whether the Noahic, Davidic, they're all fulfilled in the person of Christ.
Okay, that makes sense. For me, I have a lot of questions about Paul. I've always had questions about Paul, and I know Protestants, they, starting with Martin Luther, they really venerate what Paul said. Most of the New Testament's written by Paul and Luke. But for me, the person of Jesus seems to be central, right, to Christianity, not Paul. The questions...
But Paul preaches Jesus, so I don't see a conflict there. What specifically do you see as a conflict?
I see a lot of conflicts between Paul and Jesus, myself personally.
Okay, like what? What's an example?
I'll give you many, but I'll give you one example.
Okay.
Jesus said, do not give care for tomorrow will take care of itself. Look at the lilies of the field. Paul said, he who does not work does not eat. And basically, okay. Jesus said, let no man call himself father. And Paul says, I am your father. Darth Vader also said that.
Okay, but I mean, doesn't the Ten Commandments say honor your father and your mother?
Yeah, your biological father, sure.
Okay, so there's qualifications to it.
Well, Jesus was talking about the ecclesia, the church, right? Ecclesiast. He's talking about when you are all brothers in the church of Jesus, and you all come together. When two or more are with you, I am among you. But he's saying you all are equal. If someone wants to be the leader,
where did he say you all are equal? You're just saying that. Where did he say that?
Well, he says like this: if any one of you, he said three things. First, he said, let no man call himself father. Secondly, he said, if you want to be the leader, you actually have to be the servant of all. He's always talking about how to be the first, you got to be the last, right? To find your life, you have to deny your life. So like this idea that I can tell you many things where, but essentially, this is the big one. Jesus says when the young ruler asked him, how do I enter life? Jesus said, follow the commandments, follow the law. He said, which law? Jesus says, you know the one, honor, he started to list the commandments. Do not kill, do not steal, honor your mother.
He says, well, if you keep the first commandment, then you will by necessity keep all of them, right? So love God first, right?
Let me find the words of Jesus. 1 second.
Yeah, but Paul says the same thing. Paul says in Galatians that you have to keep the law too.
This is the interesting thing. Paul taught from his own visions. Paul was converted on the road to Damascus. He had a personal vision. I put him in the same category, myself personally. I put him in the same category as Muhammad, in the sense that he had personal visions that he interpreted were from God. And then he went into the inner rooms, into the jailer.
Yeah, I understand that, right? I understand you think that. In Galatians 5:6, he says the only faith that counts is the one that works through love. And he identifies the works are the works of the law. So Paul doesn't say that you don't teach the law or you keep the law. He says the exact same thing that Jesus says.
Oh, I agree. So Paul wanted the Jews to keep the law, to continue to keep the law.
Paul's writing to the church at Galatia. He's not writing to the Jews there.
So this is to unpack everything. So Jesus came only to the lost sheep of Israel. When Jesus was approached by a non-Jewish woman, a Gentile woman, as it says in the New Testament, she said, please heal my daughter. Jesus said, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. She keeps telling him, Master, please heal my daughter. He says, it is not
No,
good.
I'm aware. He
for-
offered the gospel was offered to the Jews first, and Paul says the same thing, to the Jew first,
Yes,
then to
correct.
the Greek. But how is that none of that's a contradiction?
Well, first of all, besides the contradictions, which I'll get into more contradictions, but look at Paul. Paul comes after Jesus, many years after Jesus. He was persecuting the students of Jesus. Do you agree? At that point, he was persecuting them.
Sure. Before he converted,
Then he went on the road in the desert.
Mhm.
You know, he might have got a sunstroke. Who knows? He might have had epilepsy. We don't know. But what we do know is that he was struck down on the road to Damascus. His companions didn't see anything. He did. And then he describes it as being caught up to the seventh heaven. He says, here's what he says. Paul, in his own words to the Galatians, says, I did not go to study with the students of Jesus. I went to Arabia for 3 years for my own visions. I taught from my own visions, he says himself. This is what I have a problem with. If you believe that Jesus appeared to you, why wouldn't you go study in his church that he set up?
Because the church isn't only located in Jerusalem. He was received into the church, if you read the book of Acts, by people from the church. So you don't have to go to Jerusalem to be received into the church.
Well, in the book of Acts, if you go to Acts 15, he does go finally after 3 years. He goes and sees what he calls the pillars of the church.
Yeah, it's in Galatians 1:18. He says, I went after that to go see Peter.
Yeah, he writes Galatians afterwards, but Luke is who writes Acts 15, and he faithfully records that Paul gets chastised by the pillars of the church. First, he argues with them, and then he gets told, if you read Acts 21 and Acts 15, he gets told, there's rumors about you that you have been spreading, there's rumors people say about you that you have been teaching the Jews not to follow the law. So show people there's no truth in these rumors. Pay for these purification rites of these, Nazarenes, these monks, right? To get their heads pure shaved. And he does it. He shows there is no truth in these rumors. So what does that mean? He means he wasn't teaching Jews to abandon the law. So you're right. Paul wasn't teaching Jews. Now, Gentiles were never under the law. Right. But Jews were. So I don't think Paul was this radical guy who was telling the Jews, now you can
this refutes what you said a minute ago, that you have a problem with Paul, because now you're saying that he's saying what you say.
Well, this is what I'm saying. What I'm saying is Luke recorded Paul being chastised and Paul going along with disproving these rumors. But then they give him a letter, which is in Acts 15, and they give him a letter that basically invokes the Holy Spirit. It invokes the entire authority of the Holy Spirit and says, there's only a few things we need you to do, Gentiles, and that is abstain from meat.
Yeah, this is from the Noahic covenant. So it's referring back to the Noahic covenant, because the argument is that if Gentiles could be made righteous at the time of Noah through those minimal requirements, we ought not expect more from them than was expected then.
Beautiful. Yes, I agree that that's probably the Noahic covenant there. Here's what I have a problem with. They told Paul to spread these things, but when he goes and they give it to him and Barnabas, and then he argues with Barnabas also, and then they part ways, whatever, fine. But then Paul, when he writes to the Galatians, he says, they did not add anything to my message, save that I remember the poor, which I was anyway going to do all along. It's like he never even tells the Galatians what he's supposed to, which is that they're not supposed to eat meat, sacrificed to idols, and all that stuff. He never delivers the message of the pillars of the church. This is what I have a problem with.
Well, hold on. Yeah. We don't know that the only thing that Paul taught or said to the Galatians, which is what's in Galatia, right? That he might have taught other things. The apostles taught all kinds of things. For example, Paul taught for 3 years day and night at Ephesus, and most of that was oral and not recorded. So we only know what he told Timothy in a written form, what's in the letters. So
no, look, he may have told them something outside of these letters, but when he talks to the Corinthians and others, he says, who are these super apostles? I'm just as much of an apostle as these guys. And the problem I have with this is, first of all, Peter was supposed to be the apostle to the Gentiles, according to the Great Commission. He was supposed to go to the Gentiles. And suddenly it's Paul. It's like the whole thing was a switcheroo.
Well, Peter, initially Peter speaks to the Gentiles, but Peter then has an issue in Acts 10 with the ceremonial law and the food, right? The unclean food. So in that sense, Paul might be a better fit providentially than Peter, because that's why Paul rebukes Peter at the beginning of Galatians.
Do you believe Jesus had prophecy and foresight, and he appointed Peter to be the
Jesus
apostle, right?
is the Son of God, so he has omniscience. He's not a human person. He's a divine person with a human nature. So,
Well, even more so. So then would you say Jesus made a mistake and it should have been Paul?
No, but we have free will, and even apostles have free will, so they're not controlled like some kind of demonic possession or something when they write things. They have the ability to also make mistakes. So Peter, even in the Gospels, makes mistakes, and hence he gets rebuked by Jesus when Jesus says, get behind me, Peter. He says later on, feed my sheep, because that's a threefold response to Peter's threefold denial. So there's no idea that apostles are like morally impeccable, even though their theology might be infallible.
Well, listen, here's the thing. Yes, we all have freedom of choice, absolutely. Sometimes God coerces a prophet like Jonah. He wasn't going to go to Tarshish, and then the fish ate him. Anyway, he was going to go there, and he did finally prophesy how God wanted. But you're right. A lot of times God uses people like Joseph's brothers to fulfill something much greater, even though they rebel. But what I am saying to you is Jesus specifically chose Peter to be the rock upon which his church was built. And the reason I have a big problem with modern Christianity is this is based around Rome. While they do claim that the seat of Peter is in Rome, Jesus set up the church in Jerusalem. Jesus set up his church so that
but we're all Orthodox, so we would agree with the error of thinking that everything is centered around Rome. So I oppose Roman Catholicism, and in fact, in Matthew 16, when he says that to Peter, 2 chapters later, he says the exact same thing to the entire college of the apostles. So we don't think that Peter has anything more than a kind of mouthpiece role of the apostles. He's not the super apostle. He's not above any of the others in any sense, beyond just being honored and being given a kind of a gift, you could say, by Christ here. But that same gift 2 chapters later is given to all of them.
Oh, I like that. But basically, what I'm basically saying is to you is this: even if Jesus rose from the dead and appeared to everybody, even if that happened, that in no way proves that Paul, a guy who lived decades later, never met the students of Jesus for 3 years, studied from his own vision, started his own churches, and then argued with, his own students. You know what I mean?
Well, how about I make the argument this way? Like, in a roundabout way, I could just simply say that the only way we even know who wrote Matthew or any of these Gospels is by the tradition of the church, and the church historically has received the Pauline epistles, so that tells me that's all I need to know. Wait, you're saying just because a guy... So Muhammad also was very successful spreading stuff, right? That's a total false analogy. It's nothing like Muhammad. I didn't say anything about success. I said the actual source for how you would even know that Matthew the Apostle wrote the book of Matthew is the church's tradition. So you can't actually have knowledge of things like apostolic authorship or the canon of Scripture without the tradition and history of the church. So that's why it's not really possible to pit Paul against everybody else, because the church, which is where we get all of these texts from, has already accepted and received Paul. I hear what you're saying, but take a step back for a second, right? Your starting point is the church. Correct. You're looking backwards through the lens of the church, right? Yeah, but you're doing the same thing, though. If you say that you're going to cite Matthew or you're going to cite Paul's epistles, to even know that those are Pauline texts or Matthean texts, it assumes the tradition of the church. I hear you. First of all, I never said that Matthew was written by Matthew, or we don't know who wrote some of these other things. They were okay, well, then if we don't know the authorship, then your arguments setting them against would also fail, because we don't know who wrote them. Your argument was premised on Luke writing Acts, Luke writing Luke, Paul writing to the Galatians. No, we know that Luke wrote Acts much better than the anonymous authors of the Gospels. Much better, because the Gospels were anonymous, whereas these books call out who they're written by. Luke wrote them. Well, how do you know what Luke that is? That's begging the question. Matthew says Matthew, but Matthew who? There's only one dude named Matthew in the first century.
That's fair, but Luke says, "I am a student of Paul. I'm a companion of Paul."
Okay, but
He wrote.
the Gnostic texts say Thomas, apostle of Christ. You know, so there's
Well, if you're
there's
gonna pull in,
Are you aware of the
right?
pseudonymous writings?
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you pull in all these pseudepigraphical stuff,
Mhm.
you're gonna have to talk about Marcion and the heretics of of Sinope, and you're gonna have to talk about Irenaeus and the four gospels. He argued that there have to be exactly four gospels because there are four winds. Do you understand how flimsy the
Did
arguments
I make an
were?
argument that the canon is known from Irenaeus? I never said that. So you're going all over the place to get away from the
Yeah, but this
argument that
canon was formed. It was formed through
No, it wasn't.
polemics.
No, it wasn't. There was no a canon explicitly universally at the time of Irenaeus. Irenaeus thought that that might work, and he made various arguments. He didn't just argue from weird things. But the fact that he made a weird argument, how does that disprove anything that I said about
Oh no, I'm
how
not
do we
trying to
know the
disprove what you're
authorship?
saying. I'm asking a question.
Okay.
And so I have two main questions. One of them is, even if Jesus rose from the dead and the Christological argument that, let's say, William Lane Craig puts forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
You, let's say, give 100% to that, okay? Let's say you've proven that Jesus, the Son of God, raised by God from the dead. Okay. What does that have to do with Paul at all?
Well, I would argue that the worldview is a holistic thing. It's not a piecemeal thing. So you could go with this piecemeal approach, but if you're going to go with the piecemeal approach, then we would devolve into the arguments that I was making about how you couldn't even know who wrote what text. So you can't even argue that Luke wrote Luke without arguing that the church preserved the text that Luke wrote. Nobody has autographa, right?
Let's say I agree with your argument. So that means we're in a world where we are lost and we don't know who wrote what. So, but that we have to be honest.
Okay, well then all
about
of your arguments against Paul fall apart because you don't know any of the authorship.
No, my argument against Paul is there is not a single place outside of his own writings and those of his buddy Luke.
But your argument was premised on Luke being the author of Luke and Acts.
No, let's say he wasn't. Let's say he wasn't. Let's say it was. We don't know. Let's say we don't know. I'm saying if you remove for a moment everything written by Paul according to Paul himself, which is his letters, and everything written by Luke according to what it says there, you remove, that's most of the New Testament. What you're left with doesn't mention Paul or Luke at all, except in one place.
So?
At all. And the one
So
place,
this is just presupposing your position. So what?
No, I'm bringing evidence for what I'm saying. I'm saying that it's circular authority that he gives to himself. Every time he writes a letter, he's saying, I am equal to the super apostles. They add nothing to my message. Listen to me. And then he says, these other men came to lead you astray. Don't listen to those guys. Listen to me. I am your father.
Okay, but in none of this have I ever actually heard a real clear, coherent reason as to why Paul is wrong or not an apostle. I just heard some gripes with, I didn't like the fact that he said that, but then when we actually got into Galatians, he was like, yeah, I don't have a problem with that. So it's like, what exactly is the problem? I don't understand.
Well, I have several. I'll start with the first one. The first one is I don't like circular authority. Someone gives himself authority, and then later, thousands of years later, you go, well, what's the problem? The problem is you're supposed to give me properly rooted authority in a guy. Why should I just accept it because he said it?
But we don't accept Paul's authority just because Paul said it. I argued that it's all part of a package deal. It's an entire worldview. So if Paul's false, Christianity's false. The whole thing falls apart. There is no Christianity
Only
without
Pauline Christianity. Only Pauline Christianity.
What other one is there?
Oh my goodness. There are many studies of the life of Jesus. For example, I'll give you one that I find beautiful.
See, this is all academic. Yeah. I'm saying Christianity is a religion with a liturgy and a history and a lived community. What other Christianity, not some scholar's theory, what other Christianity is there other than this, though?
Well, that's what Orthodox Jews say, that they're the only ones left, and the Samaritans are gone. So therefore, they must be correct because they're the only link to the past, right? So you're saying the same thing, kind of.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, I would, as an Orthodox Christian, I would say, yes, that argument holds, not for Orthodox Jews, but for us.
But why the same Orthodox Jews say, don't listen to those sects that, faded away. Listen to the ones that are still around.
Oh,
Because we
right.
have
Okay.
the
Well,
truth.
because we have predictions and prophecies that the church can't die. So if the church died out, if the true church was some group of, say, Nazarenes in the early centuries, and then it died out, and then we're going to resurrect it from some scholar, then the prophecies and predictions of the nations being converted to Christ to worship the God of Israel, etc. All of these, Isaiah prophecies and prophecies in the Psalms about the Gentiles, Jesus talking about, the gates of hell not prevailing against the church. All of those things would fail if the true church was some, third century Nazarite cult or something.
Okay, interesting. Because then that brings up two major things. One is Jeremiah 31. Jeremiah 31 says, I love to read the end of it verbatim, but it basically says, until the sun and the moon and the ocean and the earth vanish
Right.
from my sight, my decrees will never vanish, right? And God
Correct.
says, Israel, the nation of Israel at that time, it was the nation of Israel, not the church. It says, will always be a nation before me. Hold on, let me read it directly. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Hold on. Jeremiah 31.
No, I know it. We just read this one a couple of days ago. I'm not saying
do you mind if I
I
just
don't.
read
Yeah,
the
no, go ahead.
last
You can read it. Go ahead.
2 verses?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. All right. I'm reading 35, verse 35 onwards to the end. This is what the Lord says. He who appoints the sun to shine by day, who decrees the moon and stars to shine by night, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar. The Lord Almighty is his name. Only if these decrees vanish from my sight, declares the Lord, will Israel ever cease being a nation before me. This is what the Lord says. Only if the heavens above can be measured and the foundations of the earth below searched out, will I reject the descendants of Israel because of all they have done, declares the Lord. And this is the last few verses. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when this city will be rebuilt for me, meaning the city of Jerusalem, from the tower of Hananel to the corner gate. The measuring line will stretch from there straight to the hill of Gareb. It's very specific. And turn to Goah, the whole valley where the dead bodies and ashes are thrown, and the terraces out to the Kidron Valley in the east, which is, by the way, in Jerusalem. East, as far as the corner of the horse gate, will be holy to the Lord. And this is the most important part. The city will never again be uprooted or demolished. So by your logic, if the prophets are correct, Israel will be rebuilt, and there will be a city Jerusalem, that will never be uprooted or demolished, and the nation of Israel will never cease to be a nation before the Lord.
Jeremiah is talking about, in the immediate context, the return from captivity and the rebuilding that occurred. If you go to Jeremiah 33, go a couple chapters over.
But it says the city will never again be uprooted.
I'm going to explain that. Go to Jeremiah 33.
Okay.
The days are coming, he says, when, this is verse 14, I will perform the good thing which I promised to Israel and to Judah. In those days, at that time, I will cause to grow up to David a branch of righteousness. He will execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. In those days, Judah will be saved, and Jerusalem will dwell safely. This is the name that she will be called, the Lord our righteousness. For thus says the Lord, David will never lack a man to sit on the throne of the house of Israel, nor the priests, nor the Levites, nor anyone to nor the Levites lack a man to offer burnt offering before me, or kindle the grain offerings and the sacrifice continually. This is the work of the Lord. This is the word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah. Thus says, if you can break my covenant day and night. So it's parallel with the reference to the promises of providence in the Noahic covenant in 33 that we
this
just.
This is the temple, right? The temple service will continue.
Yeah, that you just no. What you just read in 31 is also referencing the Noahic covenant, right? So both of these statements are making a promise about when this will occur and when this will never be forgotten. There will never cease to be what? Descendants of David sitting on the throne. From the time of Jeremiah, after 70 AD, have there been a lack of descendants on David's throne?
Of course. And this is why I'm saying
Christians expect. So the fulfillment is the resurrection of Christ. Psalm 110, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord will send the rod of your strength out of Zion, rule in the midst of your enemies. The predictions in both of these passages are to the church that Jesus established. And that's why when he ascended in Acts and the New Testament, every time it cites 110, it cites Psalm 110 about his ascension as the beginning of his reign in Zion. Zion is the church.
So I just want to understand your position first and steelman your position, right, before I respond. So you're saying that Jesus is sort of a substitution for these prophecies, meaning
No,
when it
he is
says
the prophecy.
he is the prophecy. So when it says that, the reason I read the measuring line and the gate and the valley, the Kidron Valley, these are very specific. God is
The
calling out
specifics,
specific
right? The
areas.
specifics refer to when the Jews return from Babylonian captivity. That's the historical immediate context, right? The fulfillment is the messianic fulfillment.
I disagree.
Okay, I got it. I know you don't believe it, but the messianic fulfillment is just like when Jesus is arguing with the Pharisees and Jesus says, then who is David talking to when he says, the Lord said to my Lord in Psalm 110? I'm saying it's the same principle in Jeremiah 33 that David will never lack a man to sit on the throne. How is that fulfilled if after 70 AD, there's no Davidic throne? Well, it turns out Jesus has been on the throne. He's the son of David, and he's been reigning since his ascension, and he will always reign. That's how he will never lack a man.
I understand your interpretation, and it has a few things going for it, right? Like the fact that Jews don't have sacrifices for the last 2,000 years either.
Well, it's also Genesis. It's also Genesis 49, which says that, right, until Shiloh comes, right, there will not be the scepter. The scepter will not depart from Judah until the lawgiver comes.
All right, but let me tell you what an alternative interpretation that fits everything. And in fact, Christians believe this one also. And that is, in the future, maybe the near future, who knows, because Israel has been sort of constituted now, and nobody could have believed it 200 years ago, that everything will be rebuilt, as it says in Jeremiah 31, and the third temple will be there, and the sacrifices will come, and from that point on, it will never be uprooted or demolished. Meaning it hasn't happened yet, obviously, because until now it has been uprooted, demolished, and you're right, there hasn't been people sitting on the throne. What the prophecy may be about, and a lot of these prophecies have been, could have been in the far future, which hasn't even happened yet, just like Jesus' prophecies as well.
Well, but I think if you look at Luke 21, Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple. It's very clear because that was written to Gentiles. It's not talking about primarily the end of the world. I think the temple is a type of the whole universe. So there's a 3-tier structure to the temple. And that's why Hebrews says that when the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement, that's a type, according to the author of Hebrews, of Christ ascending into the third heavens, the Holy of Holies, God's throne. So in that sense, the destruction of the temple in 70 AD is a foreshadowing of the destruction of the universe, I would say. But why does Genesis, to go along with this theme of a fulfillment at the first advent, why does Genesis say that the scepter will not depart from Judah until the lawgiver comes, until Shiloh comes?
Because I'll tell you, first of all, Shiloh was already at a time, it was an earlier time than Jesus. It was about 1,000 years before. Shiloh was a city, and the ark was in Shiloh. But before that, Judah was remember, each of the tribes got a place, got a piece of land.
Right.
Okay, and so the Ark of the Covenant would travel. Each of the brothers got something. So when it says that the scepter wouldn't depart from Judah, it can mean one of two things. It can mean that no other tribe or descendant could be a king. So it couldn't be that suddenly, some other lineage would become king. In fact, Jesus, the biographers had to go and find the lineage for him exactly for that reason, because we know that every king of Israel has to go from David. Now, are there going to be periods where there won't be anyone on the throne? Of course. But if there will be someone on the throne, it has to be a descendant, and that's what it means.
Well, but isn't it interesting that, like Daniel 9 says, that when he came, there's an end, he's cut off, there's an end to sacrifice, just like in Genesis 49, the lawgiver, the Davidic kingdom ends, There's no
Let me
no
just
more
look at
Davidic
Genesis.
king.
Anything that is in the first 5 books, which is the Torah, you got the Sadducees. The Samaritans have a Pentateuch, which they only believe those 5 books. They don't believe the prophets.
Yes, I'm aware.
Right? And this is the time of Jesus. By the way, I'm just telling the listeners who might not be aware of this. During the time of Jesus, the northern kingdom was filled with Samaritans. Even today, it's called Samaria, Judah and Samaria, by the Jews, which is interesting because the Samaritans were like numbering maybe 1 million people. And so these people did not believe in the prophets or the other books. They just believed in the 5 books. My point is this. Those 5 books, they say that there will be a king, but they also leave it open like there might not be a king, because Samuel told Israel that, guys, maybe you shouldn't have a king at all.
So, I mean, look, do you think, like, as far as I'm aware, I mean, I have rabbinic commentaries and, Jewish study Bible, this kind of stuff. Like, do you think that Genesis 49:10 is a messianic prophecy?
Let me look at it. Genesis 49:10. Sorry, I'm not familiar with every passage. Yeah. Okay. That the ruler's staff between his feet. Okay. So this is where Israel, who is Jacob.
I'm just saying, like, classic Judaism saw this as a messianic prophecy, right? It's in the Targums. This is seen as
maybe, yeah. But remember that all these later generations, including the Talmud, they look at this and they have genres of sort of like 100 years of this genre, 100 years of that genre. The Talmud had a genre called, it's like exegesis. Everyone's got their exegesis, right? And so these are men. These are men, and you as Christians agree that these are men trying to understand these scriptures, correct?
Well, in our view, it's Jesus that is the God of the Old Testament, and he's the one that's inspiring these people to write this stuff. So, no, I don't. I mean, men are writing these things. I don't think that there's no human synergy or anything going on, but it's ultimately, I think, a divine inspiration.
Well, it's hard to say because there were so many different sects at the time of Jesus.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, all right. So basically, in this view, then we could make this into anything. This is where it gets into this is almost like the way Muslims do or Jews do with the Talmud, or the Muslims with the Hadiths. Like, we can really craft this into anything, right?
I don't want to craft. No, I only go by evidence, right? And remember what I said in the beginning, how we got into this. I said I have 2 problems. One is, you said according to the prophecies, we have to take it seriously. I brought up Jeremiah 31 to show that he predicts stuff that hasn't happened yet. It couldn't have happened yet because the physical...
and then when hold on, but then when I show you the same wording 2 chapters later that David will never lack a man, you say, oh, well, but then we can have situations where that doesn't really mean David never lacks a man. So, in other words, you can interpret it.
I just want to be clear. From that point on, David will not lack a man. From the point where the 3rd temple is rebuilt and the city is rebuilt, from that point, it will never be uprooted. So logically, it hasn't happened yet because it has been uprooted. So it must be in the future.
Or the fulfillment is the ascension of Christ, and that's how God kept the covenant and never denied the covenant, even though he said in Jeremiah 3 and in Hosea 2 that he would divorce Israel. When was the divorce?
Okay, so
hold on. So when was the divorce?
First of all, he never said I will reject Israel.
No,
forever.
Divorce. You saying he never said that?
No. God says over and over that he will gather Israel back from the furthest parts of the earth.
I'm not talking. I know the promises of return. I'm talking about the statements of divorce. What are those? How do you interpret those?
Well, can you give me the exact verses or chapters?
The first one is Jeremiah 3:8.
Okay, Jeremiah was made to marry a prostitute, and even
so now Jeremiah doesn't count.
Example. Okay. No, but I'm saying, I'm giving you the context. Jeremiah was even told by the Lord to marry a prostitute, if I remember correctly.
It's not Jeremiah, it's Hosea.
Hosea. Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's all right, but Hosea is the other text that says that God will divorce Israel. There's 2 passages. It says
well, there you go. Look, it's an imagery, just like Jesus was giving imagery about plucking an eye out or having your whole body.
Okay, but what I'm saying is that your interpretation says, well, it's just imagery. My interpretation actually explains how there was a divorce, but also God kept faithful because the real Israel is those who have faith in Christ. That fulfills Genesis 12, that all the nations are blessed in Abraham's seed. If Abraham's seed ultimately is those who have faith in Yahweh, not just biological descent, then that fulfills both the passage of Jeremiah 33 and Jeremiah 3 and Hosea 2 of a divorce.
First of all, I'm happy for more people to have faith in God and to follow his commandments, even if it's no hide commandments. I'm very happy about that. So that's a good thing. All I'm saying is that you got to understand, in the time of Jeremiah, what was happening, there was an exile.
Right.
The Jews were worried that they might not return. And,
right.
God, and Jeremiah is saying, hey, God is currently mad at you.
Right.
He's faithful to you. So you are the one who has broken the covenant. So in his time, he's not thinking about Jesus. It could be later, you could say maybe it's a prototype of Jesus. But I'm saying...
Okay, but I'm not saying that Jeremiah is immediately thinking of Jesus when he says that you will be divorced. You're correct that during the period of exile in the Babylonian captivity, there is this concern, have we been forsaken? And Jeremiah is using the language of Deuteronomy 24 of the bill of divorce, when God says that a man who, wants to find that his wife is unfaithful, he can give her a bill of divorce and so forth. So the language of Deuteronomy 24 is being used in Jeremiah 3 to say, you've been unfaithful, you're going to be divorced. Now, they're brought back to the land, so they're not at this stage divorced. What I'm saying is that in the Christian interpretation, in the passage like Matthew 23, Jesus says that because Israel is rejecting her living Torah, the Messiah, and let's say for the sake of argument that Jesus is the Messiah, then the fullness of the sins from all of these passages, including not just the predictions of salvation and restoration, but also the covenant sanctions, the bill of divorce, the warnings come to their full fruition. That's why 70 AD leads to the destruction of Jerusalem, which, if you're consistent and you believe in the covenant curses of Deuteronomy and Leviticus, then clearly, whatever you think of Jesus, there had to have also been a cursing in diaspora in 70 AD, which is covenant curses. So it would be yet another statement of Jeremiah 3, bill of divorce, right? So if the Babylonian...
I see where you're coming from, and I agree about the Deuteronomy predictions of expulsion and then later gathering when the Jews return spiritually to God, right, in their distant lands. But again, I want to ask you, when Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 31, verse 37, he says, this is what the Lord says, only if the heavens above can be measured and the foundations of the earth below searched out, will I ever reject the descendants of Israel because of all they have done, declares the Lord.
And I'm saying that that promise was always to those that had the true faith and not merely the biological descent. So you're saying that ultimately that's to the biological descent. I'm saying, no, it's ultimately to those who have the faith of God and love him. And that's not just Jewish people, because it's also before Abraham, it's people like Noah. So they're all part of that heavenly city. They're all part of the same faith.
This is, I think we should get into this topic, because this was your original topic, like the supersessionism, right? The church.
It's a fulfillment. It's not a superseding. It's literally like, it's more like a telos or a purpose, like, culmination, more so than like...
Okay, fulfillment. Fulfillment is a good word. I'll get to that word fulfillment because it's used when Jesus talks about, I'll read the red letter Bible of Jesus next. But I just want to get onto this for a second.
All right, we got a lot of people, so let's do this one.
Sorry. Okay.
No, you can make this last argument. Go ahead and make your last argument. I'll give you the final word here, and then we'll take the next callers. But hey, it was a really great discussion. I want you to call back in if you want to sometime, but we're going to move on to the other ones.
Follow me.
What's that?
Thank you. Okay, follow me. Yeah, I love this. I'm a Jewish person, but I do believe in Jesus being the Messiah. I'm a monotheist, so I don't think that Jesus is God, but I don't think Jesus claimed to be God. But anyways, give me 60 seconds. I'll try to make my point.
Go ahead.
Yeah. If you look at all the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, or the first 5 books, it always talks about biological descendants. The word dor means generation. This is a statute for all generations, means biological generations, obviously. When it talks about, the generations after Noah, and it counts the number of years. So this is talking about physical, biological generations. Jeremiah 31 talks about physical places like the valley, the Kidron Valley, and how this will be rebuilt to this, over here, and it will never be uprooted. So to me, I read this literally. I think that it hasn't happened yet because it has been uprooted, but in the future, it hasn't. Now, Christians believe that Jesus came on a donkey and he will come on the clouds of glory in the future. Jews also believe that the Messiah will come either on a donkey or on the clouds of glory, and I like to tell them he's going to come on both. He came once on the donkey, next time he's going to come on the clouds of glory. Here's where I have an issue with the whole Christianity. When I say Christianity, I mean the church that came up later. Including Orthodox Church, here's what I have a problem with. The church that Jesus himself set up in Jerusalem was also unfortunately destroyed when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. And they fade into history. So in other words, James, the brother of Jesus, Jakubos in Greek, his children are kind of ruling.
All right. Well, this is moving on to other arguments. So I got your point about the biological descendants, and I agree that the immediate context at the time of the promise to Abraham, God is really saying that your descendants through Isaac, etc., not through Ishmael, that will be the covenant. Just like if we go back prior to it being a tribe, it was a family. So with Noah, it was his household. Prior to that, it was Adam and Eve and their children. So I'm not denying the actual literal historical biological element, but I'm saying that even amongst the biological element, it is not all Israel that is Israel, as Paul says. So it would still be, even in the time of Jeremiah, when he rebukes the Jews, he says, circumcise your hearts, right? That's the same point that Paul makes when he talks about the purpose of baptism is to show that you have actually circumcised your heart. So it was always the case that you needed to circumcise your heart. That was the only thing that's what really saved you, so to speak, even though, yes, of course, it is the flesh descendants of Abraham that make up the nation of Israel, who is the covenant when it goes from family or from household to tribe to nation, right? And we have a national covenant, you could say, with Moses. I don't deny that, but it's not just the nation state that saves you. The nation state is the preparation for the next phase, which is the opening of that up to the Gentiles. And I think that
let me leave you with this one question.
Okay.
Let me just set it up.
Sure.
It'll take me last 60 seconds. Okay, it's very important. I believe that the Jewish Mosaic covenant was given to the Jews for all generations. Many of the laws, it says you must do this for all generations, physical generations. Now, Jesus said, I came to the lost sheep of Israel. And in Matthew 5, this is the key. He says, do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets.
Right.
I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill them. And the key to me is the original Greek word fulfill, because it's not the same word as when Jesus dies on the cross and says, everything telestilai, everything is accomplished. Everything is fulfilled. So it's translated in English the same, but it's actually a different word. So here's my point. Jesus says, for I truly tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly, like Paul said, the law is obsolete, etc., will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven, meaning they'll get into heaven, but they will be the least there. And whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven.
Right, I understand.
And so the last thing I want to say is this. I think that the Gentiles were never supposed to do everything that the Jews were supposed to do.
Right.
I think the Jews were taught by Jesus to basically be more merciful, be more thankful for all the mercies of their God that they don't deserve. But Jesus never said that, just sola fide, just believe in me.
Yeah, we don't teach
you'll
that.
be saved. He said you got to follow the law anyway.
Right. And and we agree with that. Where we disagree on that point, I thank you for your call, is the way that the law is kept is what changes. Not that the law is useless or worthless. For example, when Paul writes his epistles, I'm just using this as an example, he goes to the the ceremonial laws that deal with like not sowing two patches of garment, not sowing two seeds in a field. And he says those are pedagogical things that even the Gentile church can learn from in terms of morals and not being unequally yoked. So Paul takes even the ceremonial commands and applies them even to the Gentiles in a spiritual way. And that's what we would say as Orthodox Christians, is that, yes, you're correct that you cannot say Leviticus doesn't matter, Deuteronomy doesn't matter. In fact, if you look at Revelation 2 and 3, the covenant curse language and blessing language is applied to the seven churches of Asia Minor. So when Jesus talks to the seven churches, he says, if you do this, you will be blessed. If you do this, I will come quickly, bring cursing and judgment, just like what you read in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, so the covenant cursing and the covenant blessings. So I would disagree, though, that the Orthodox Church is some later invention. If you watch this documentary that we made, actually, I think that the real Messianic Judaism is actually Orthodox Christianity. And that's the purpose of this documentary. It's called Christian Worship in the Old Testament. Everything that the church does is literally crafted, we believe, by the apostles from the temple liturgy and the synagogue liturgy service. It's combined into an Orthodox Christian worship service, the divine liturgy. That's the pattern of worship that you see when you read Cyprian or Justin Martyr or Irenaeus or any of these church fathers when they discuss the pattern of worship and the liturgy. So everybody should, if you're interested in this question, watch that documentary. But the last point on the heaven and earth passing away, ultimately the law is fulfilled in the person of Christ. We think he is the living Torah. But when he says to not think of it as going away until heaven and earth go away, there was a sense in which heaven and earth went away when the temple was destroyed. So in our view, in 70 AD, when he talks about the destruction of the temple in Luke 21, which happens, 40 years later, there is a sense in which, if you read Hebrews, and I know that guy's not going to like Hebrews, but Paul, assuming he wrote Hebrews, discusses the temple again like a miniature of the universe. So when the temple was destroyed, it is like the heavens and the earth being rolled up like a scroll and being done away with. Doesn't mean that we don't look to Leviticus or whatever to find spiritual principles. We do. And that's what Paul does in his epistles. But as he pointed out correctly, the expectation was never that the Gentiles were supposed to follow the Jewish ceremonial laws per se, as at least as they're done by the Jews. Like you can't keep the Jubilee laws if you're in Mexico, right? Because the laws pertain to the land. So the laws for the land of Israel. That's why the church in Acts 15 chose the basic Noahic covenant principles for the reception of Gentiles into the church. But that church didn't die out. It wasn't destroyed. It didn't become some weird Nazarene sect. It is the church of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century. And the Orthodox Church teaches the exact same thing as that church. Now, in terms of whether Jesus was divine, and whether he's the God of the Old Testament, you can look at all of the Trinitarian discussions and lectures that we have. Right here, for example, this is part 1. This is the Trinity in the Torah.